Alright, so we're checking out the Happymodel Bassline in this video. This is a 2-inch 2S micro. I think in my previous video on the Nanofly 20, I think I mentioned this as a 2S or a 2-inch 1S micro, but it's actually a 2S micro. So much a bigger setup here, bigger motors, obviously 2S battery, so the performance is going to be quite a bit different from the Nanofly. But if you're looking for something a little bit more beefy, with of course weight penalty, it's obviously going to be heavier. Anyway, so let's take a look at what comes in the box. It comes in this little plastic carrying case. Doesn't come with any batteries. I'll talk about the battery situation here in a second. So you get two of these battery trays that goes on the bottom. You have to install these yourself, but they don't come installed. I'll show you that here in a second. It's not a big deal. You get a spare one here. It's just 3D printed TPU, spare canopy, and I believe this is for like a RunCam split. So if you happen to have like one of those boards from the Mobile 7 HD, Mobile 6 HD, I think this is the same canopy, and you could transfer that camera over to this one to make it an HD setup if you want. Get some stickers, of course, at the bottom there. Get a bag with some spare props, prop removal tool, some spare nuts and screws, screwdriver, Allen wrench, and extra battery pads. So this little battery tray here on the bottom, you have to take off these nuts that are on the screw, and then just slide on the battery tray on here. It's a 3D printed part, and then put the nuts back on. It takes like 5 minutes. The recommended battery is this 2S 450 GMD high volt, and it does fit in here, although it's a very, very tight fit. There are other batteries that they said that could be used, a 350, 450, 550, 650. Of course, those probably won't fit this tray exactly like this one does. It's a very tight fit, even with the 450. I didn't have a 350, so I did try a 300 2S. This one also fits in here, no problem. It's a bit looser, but it doesn't slide out. It's a little bit looser fit. Flight times are going to be quite a bit different. 4 minutes to 4.5 minutes if you're flying kind of slower, maybe even 5 minutes if you're really just cruising around on the 450. The 300 is not going to give you that much if you're pretty aggressive, which I think you're going to want to be, because it's going to have a better power to weight ratio with this lighter setup here. Looking at a minute and a half, 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes of flight time on the 300, depending on how aggressively you're flying. Again, so we have a 2-inch micro. We have 1103 motors in this one here. These EX 1103, 11,000 kV motors. We've got the gem fan, tri-bladed 2-inch props. The board on here is their X12 board, and this one is the Express LRS version. You can see the little ceramic antenna on board there. 12 amp ESCs. It has a built-in Express LRS receiver. It's got the Betaflight 4.3 something firmware with the version 2 Express LRS on here. So if you want the version 3, you'll have to go to the website and get the updated Betaflight firmware to get this to Express LRS version 3. But that's a DIY project. You have to do that on your own. And it does come with an onboard Open VTX 400 milliwatt video transmitter. Of course, this is analog, so you get a single board for all that. For your camera, you get your Caddx Ant analog camera and this canopy, and then your VTX antenna comes out the top here. The bottom plate frame that holds everything is about 2 millimeters thick, and then of course the motors that are being held on with 3 screws here, although there is also a 4-screw mount if you have a different motor on, if you want to try a different motor out. And of course you have their plugs for the motors, pretty typical of Happymodel, along with a micro USB port here pointing out the bottom. Alright, so this is how much the drone weighs. It's a little over 40 grams, 40.6 grams on my scale. And then with the recommended battery, the 2S450, the total weight's at 68.4. If you go with a lighter 300, the weight comes in at 60.1. So if I didn't mention it before, this is called the Bassline, and this is actually a design inspired by Nathan Loops. I think he's one of the Happymodel team pilots, and I guess this is one of his favorite models that he's been flying around for some time, so they decided to make a bind and fly model out of it. They did go with a bigger motor setup, obviously for heavier setup, 1103 motors. And if you kind of compare this to like the Flywoo Baby Nano 20, which is very similar to this one, that one comes with 1002 motor. So it's a much smaller motor on a bi-blade 2-inch prop. So it doesn't have as much acro performance as this one, but that one weighs a little bit less. So if you're looking for more acro performance in a 2-inch setup here, this is probably the best one with the biggest motor. Obviously, you know, if you're looking for power and acro performance, you obviously the bigger motor, the bigger battery, the better. So, you know, the question is, how does this 2-inch 2S toothpick compare to your normal, like, traditional toothpick, the 3-inch 3S toothpick? So that usually is like a 1303.5 motor around 5,000 kV on a 3S battery. And of course, the 3-inch is going to beat this 2-inch pretty much every day, twice on Sunday. So, you know, I'm not going to get that question, how does the 2-inch compare to 3-inch? 3-inch is just going to be better. It's got bigger prop, more power, 3S battery. It's just going to be better than a 2-inch and 2S setup. And conversely, the 2-inch 2S setup is going to still beat out a 2-inch 1S setup or a 2-inch 2S setup with a smaller motor. So, you know, if you're comparing this one to the Flywoo, this one's better than the Flywoo, and then the Flywoo is better than the one from Sub 250, the one I just reviewed recently, the NanoFly 20. You know, of course, at the same time, we each sort of, you know, downgrade, you know, smaller motor, smaller battery, less battery, the overall weight is going to be less, the noise is going to be less, of course. So it kind of really depends on what you're looking for and what your priorities are. So if you're looking for, you know, ultimate power and performance, obviously you want to go as big as possible and just get a 5-inch, you know, 5-inch on 6S. That's going to give you the best performance out of anything you want to be flying FPV. But of course, in a micro, this is a pretty good package. You know, if you want to go take the next step up, you can move up to a 2.5-inch toothpick or a 3-inch toothpick. You know, those have already come out. You know, I have plenty of videos on those on my channel already. But yeah, this kind of fills in a little bit of a gap there in that sort of between the 3-inch toothpick and like the 2-inch, you know, toothpicks that are like not as much power. This one kind of fills in that little gap where you're kind of looking for a little bit more performance. This one fills that gap in pretty nicely. Now this version is Express LRS. It does come in a SPI FreeSky version and a FlySky version on the flight controller. Of course, it's a built-in receiver. Only comes in analog right now. Probably wouldn't be too hard to convert this to Walksnail or HD0. You just have to add the video transmitter board, and you know, they just will mount here. You'll probably need a longer screw to mount the extra board, and then you need a spacer, you know, the rubber grommets to mount those, but it probably isn't going to be too hard. You just have to find the screws, the longer screws to do that. So of course it comes with a pretty decent PID tune out of the box. I think Happymodel has kind of gone the other direction where they're really pushing sort of the limits of their PID tune. So I think on mine, the flight controller is kind of screwed down a little bit too tight. So I get there's a fair amount of prop wash oscillation, especially on hard turns on my particular setup. I think it's just because the flight controller might be screwed down a little bit tighter than probably the one that they actually tuned. So they, you know, they obviously build one, they tune it, and then probably that one had their flight controller a little bit less screwed down. And so mine being a little bit more screwed down probably has a little bit more vibrations because of that. It's not terrible. It's just something I noticed. You know, obviously I could probably tinker with the tune or tinker with the, you know, tightness of the screws on the flight controller. Those are things that I could probably play with, but of course I never do that because I just bind it up and fly it like I always do on all my reviews. I did notice that when you go to a smaller, lighter battery, the vibrations do get a little bit worse, especially in when you're doing the hard maneuvers. And I think it's because the tune is for the slightly heavier battery. And, you know, obviously at this weight level here, you know, 5-10 grams of weight difference is going to make a difference in the PID tune. So just something to be aware of. If you are going to be using different batteries, or, you know, maybe even a bigger, heavier battery, the way it's going to perform is going to feel different and look different compared to what you're going to see with the 2S 450. I didn't fly too much on the 2S 300 because it didn't really fly that great, and this is not one of the recommended batteries, but I don't have a 350. It's just that I did notice that the performance is a lot better because it's lighter on the smaller battery, but at the expense of flight time. You just don't get the flight time because the battery is a lot smaller. Anyway, last thing to note here is on the motor protection, pretty good. A lot of carbon there to protect that motor. So if you're going to be doing a lot of acro tricks, which I think you will want to do with this one, and you crash, this one will probably be okay, I think, for the most part. Yeah, other than that, not much more to say with this one. I like the performance of this one, for this size. I am curious to see if they would make a digital version, like a walk snail version down the road. Obviously, it's going to add 10 more grams, probably. And how does this fly with an extra 10 more grams? We'll have to see if they make a version. If they do, I'll bring out that video. But that's going to do it for this video. Talk to you guys in the next one.